learn about the Center for Contemplative Contemplation and Education. And yesterday, some of us went to Rune Arun yesterday, and that was my first visit as well. And it was quite an incredible place and a fantastic model of holistic education. There isn't anything that I've seen anywhere, including in the States, at the scale and the level of integration that is there. So it's quite remarkable. Should I speak louder or closer? No. Okay. How's that? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. But you know, the thing that I took away from the school visit was its origin story. And I don't know if you know the origin story, but the reason the school is there is because there was a boy, first or second grade, who was having trouble in regular school. And so his mother, and I'm sure his father, just felt the suffering and felt the compassion, and as any of us might, for our child or another child. And so the school comes out of that incredible love and compassion. That's it. There's no shortage of that from what I can gather in this room, that love and compassion. And from what I've seen so far, there's no shortage of that in Thailand either. You know, that's the deep root, the deep current, I think, that really drives all of our work, that sense of love and compassion. So I wonder if, in keeping with the Contemplative Education Center, we might take just 30 seconds or so right now and just see if you can bring someone or something that you feel love or appreciation for into your mind, into your heart, and we'll just take 30 seconds or so in silence, just bringing that person or that thing just into our heart, as happened with the school. So if I had a bell, I would ring it now. So come on back. So again, there's no shortage of that. We can access that consciousness so quickly, so instantaneously, right? And that is the motor behind our actions. That's the deep well. So in the spiritual traditions, in the wisdom traditions, this love, this compassion is both the path and the goal, right? It's both the medicine and it's the power. And it is the motor behind holistic education as well. Now, in the spiritual traditions, the wisdom traditions, there's also love has a partner, compassion has a partner, right? In Buddhism, it's love or compassion and wisdom. In Christianity, it's love and wisdom. So wisdom is this partner. Wisdom is kind of funny, though. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a great transcendentalist from Boston, he says, wisdom is a blend of what is true with what is right. So it integrates both clear seeing and also the heart in some way. And so we see that in the school, we see that in our motivation, and we have lots of evidence for that in our projects. Thomas Aquinas, he says that wisdom involves seeing into the heart of something or seeing from a greater height. So seeing the big picture, not just the tree, but the forest as well. So one of the questions I ask, if wisdom is about clear seeing, if it's been seeing about into the heart as well as this big view of the world, what's it seeing today? What is there to see clearly today? Undoubtedly, there is an incredible possibility, remarkable in terms of technology, in terms of our students, just unfathomable possibility. And at the same time, there's unimaginable peril. We can destroy ourselves. And in fact, we are destroying ourselves. We're destroying the planet and we're destroying all sorts of things. There are a lot of things to see these days that are pressures. Migration is remarkable. Certainly environmental degradation, economic disparity, the kind of political bifurcation that goes on. I've just come from the States, and so it's a difficult time to be in the States, right? So, and there are a couple other things too. Technology, including artificial intelligence, is absolutely shaping consciousness. It's training us not for contemplative opening, but instead for fast shifting of attention. It's not training us for concentrative action or engagement, but it's training us for splintering our attention. One person calls this continuous partial attention, CPA, continuous partial attention. We never fall deeply enough into our action or into the moment, into the present, in order to really get the nourishment and the knowing that is in the center of that. So technology is remarkable. I was able to talk to my wife yesterday and see her picture. I did an interview for somebody yesterday. It was amazing, but also we have this other problem. And artificial intelligence, of course, is on the rise at the moment. And things like if you search on Google, you'll find something called invisible algorithmic editing. And what this means is that when you search for one thing, the next time you go to Google, you'll get more things like that. It's shaping what you see. It's shaping what you are exposed to. And so this begins to narrow our consciousness, or narrow our exposure to the world rather than greater. So these are real threats. And in fact, I think the greater the technology, the outer technology, the greater the need for inner technology. And this is something that schools have missed up until quite recently. So we also know one other thing that this clear seeing may reveal is just how fast change is happening. You know, my two-year-old iPhone, according to my daughter, is out of date. You know, so, and I'm long out of date, of course, according to her. And so there's no way that we can predict what the marketplace will look like, how to prepare students for the future. The old model of preparing students for the marketplace, which was the foundation for public education, is out the window. The other problem, of course, is that all information lives right here in our pocket or in our hand. So the idea of school teaching information is really outdated. So what are schools for? You know, what's the point that we should engage? So I have some really messy notes here, so you'll forgive me as I take a contemplative pause in and try to sort this. So schooling can't be about just accumulating information, right? And certainly wisdom is not about information either. Wisdom isn't about accumulating something. One doesn't possess wisdom as if it's a thing. Instead, one acts wisely or not. So one of the things that's happened in the last 400 years is that we've really separated knowing from being. We have been attending to knowledge And it's been remarkable by any standard. It's just really fantastic what we've gained. But we've also lost something along the way. And so in order to put pieces back together, we have to become, I think, intensely interested not only in knowledge, but also in knower, the person, and in knowing. And so I want to make an argument that that if we're going to go forward in contemplative education and holistic education, that we need to drop knowledge away a little bit and instead focus on how we know. It's not what we know, but how we know. So there's considerable evidence, both neurological and phenomenological, from our own lived experience, that there really are only two ways of knowing. Certainly rhetorically we can slice this in all kinds of other ways, but really in terms of consciousness, it's arguable that it comes down to only two ways of knowing. One of them, the first way, puts things in categories. It seeks answers. For the last 400 years, it's focused on certainty, on predictability. It's about precision. It's about calculation. It's about the abstract. And that's just and only what's defined education. That's how we focused for the most part. The other way of knowing, instead of involving category, involves contact. Instead of answers, it opens questions. Instead of seeking certainty, it considers possibility. Instead of reducing, a reductionistic view, smallest common denominator, the smallest building block, it's about integrating. Instead of calculating, it's appreciating. So for example, in qualitative research, we have something called appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry. So instead of going in and finding out what's wrong with something or dismantling it, instead we'll say, what do we appreciate about this? What's beautiful about this? What touches me about this? What am I curious about this? A very different entry point for knowing, right? Imagine on the one hand, what's wrong with this versus what do I like about this? So very, very different. So instead of objectification and having the delusion that objectivity is possible in the world, it instead emphasizes the interiority, the subjective. How do you feel about that? How does that feel in your gut? What do you think about that? What questions do you have about that? A very different sort of approach, right? So, and this is about, instead of differentiation, which is what the last 400 years have been about, in terms of science, differentiating this from that, separating molecules, it's about integration. And though we've been living in an age of information, the horizon, the frontier, is really an age of integration. How do we put the pieces back together? We've taken them apart and we've separated us from the world. How do we put them back together? It isn't that the one way of knowing is bad and the other is good. It isn't that at all. It requires in and of itself an integration. So these two ways of knowing should be familiar in some ways, right? These are ancient ideas. So we might think of them as masculine and feminine, not male and female, but masculine and feminine, as yang and yin, as Ida and Pingala in Hindu tradition, as this balance back and forth. And we've been incredibly one-sided. And what holistic education invites and what contemplative education invites is some kind of a reintegration, this reintegration of knowing and being, so that it's knowing with all of us, within all of us in some way. Goethe said, in order to find yourself in the infinite, you must distinguish and then unite. We've had 400 years of distinguishing, of differentiating. Powerful, wonderful, fantastic. We can't stop doing that, but we have to unite it. Da Vinci, 500 years ago, Leonardo da Vinci, he said, he had a warning. You know, he saw this coming 100 years before it really took root. And he had a name for this problem, that is, this problem of this left side. And he called it an abbreviator's approach, the abbreviator's approach. Abbreviators simplify everything into its simplest form. This has been the root of science since Aristotle, looking for the smallest bits. But our life doesn't exist in bits. It has some other quality to it. So I think, you know, our view, our work, really, as we move as a culture, as we move as a school, as we move personally, is trying to find a way to make this integration ours. And this means opening the aperture of consciousness. This is what we're at the edge of. So much of what we are witness to is a lack of wisdom. Lots of technology, lots of intelligence even, lots of calculation, and a remarkable lack of wisdom. And so part of what we're talking about is trying to open this aperture, integrate what is true and what is good, see from a greater height, and see into the heart of something. So what this engenders, I think, in education is a pedagogy of presence. So how do you bring all of you, right? Knower, knowledge, and known. How do you bring knower in? So a pedagogy of presence. An epistemology of resonance, this other way of knowing, is about contact, about connection, about meeting. Martin Buber says all real living is meeting. And this way of knowing is exactly about that. The other moves from becoming an I-it relationship to one of I and thou. We participate with each other. We don't objectify. And all of this is not just about how we deal with each other. That's easy to see. That's primary. But this is a way of inquiry. This is a way of inquiring into nature, into the idea, into the topic at hand. That when we make contact with it, it opens it up in some way. So there are some ways, I think, that we can do this that are maybe familiar and down to earth and applied. I think that one of the ways that I think about this is we've been missing our minds. We've been missing certain minds. And so I saw all of these in practice yesterday at the school. The first one, I think, is, and I'll just mention these and end here in a couple minutes. So the first one is we've been missing an empathic mind. That is, having empathy is primary as a way of knowing. And again, not just knowing another person, but knowing another thing. So here's one of my graduate students back in the States, and she was working as a preschool teacher for a little while, and she had a student who every recess, he would go outside and he would stomp on all the ants that he could find. And at this school, that was not what you were to do. And yet she didn't want to come down and punish him or yell at him. She didn't know what to do. And then the next day, she just told me the story of a couple months ago. The next day, she thought about it. She dreamt about it even. And the next day, she asked the student a question. And the question was, what do you think the ant is doing? What do you think the ants are doing out there? And he said, oh, I'm not sure. They're carrying things. And between the two of them, they figured out that they were getting food. And they were getting food for their family. And the little boy sort of paused. You could see his face change in that way that happens when, when we have an aha and settle in. And so she didn't say anything more. And the next day, recess approached, and she was a little wary. She wondered what was going to go on today. And he stepped outside, and he got down on the ground. Thanks. And she found him taking up sticks and leaves and all sorts of debris and building a house for the ants now. So in that incredibly simple moment, through that empathic knowing, see through the eye of another, in this case, the eye of an ant, suddenly we have a radical reorientation of how we know, and therefore the value and the virtue that goes with that kind of knowing. Because the way we know affects our values, particularly, and our virtues. I'll mention these four other things really quickly. So empathic mind, embodied mind. So we've left the body behind. Augustine and then Descartes in the West separated our heads and our abstraction and our thoughts from the body. So anything that brings the body back in, pottery, for example, exercise. But even more than that, now the front edge of cognitive psychology recognizes something called embodied cognition. It recognizes that the gut, for example, and the heart has neuropeptides in it. These neuropeptides we thought were only in the brain. These proteins were associated with thinking. And now we know through things like neuroscientific research and now things like somatic psychotherapy that the gut is thinking too. In fact, we don't know things so quickly through our mind. We get a sense of it, and then we make through our body, and then we make sense of it later. So this idea of accessing the sensual world, accessing our what's called through interoception, the interior world, is a way of bringing the body into the classroom. Three other things quickly. One is the imaginative mind. We've really left imagination for children. And in Western psychology, for example, we've really denigrated it. We haven't recognized that, for example, all of Einstein's experiments, he was a theoretical physicist, right? All of his experiments were done with imagination. What would happen if I'm traveling on the head of a rocket at the speed of light, right? That's imagination. So, we can imagine, I live in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta, where Martin Luther King is from. So I have a dream, right? Can you imagine a different possibility than exists now? So two more quickly. Fourth mind that's been missing is the beautiful. We saw that all over the place yesterday, from the architecture to everything yesterday. So schools have not paid much attention to beauty, except in the West, prom dresses and the art class. But how do you integrate beauty all the way through? The Greeks, for example, understood three things. They emphasized three things only: the good, the true, and the beautiful. And what they said is if you go deeply into any one of them, you end up in all of the others. So beauty isn't just ornamentation, its depth of being in some way. It reintegrates being and knowing again. In our spiritual traditions, our wisdom traditions, again, all of our most sacred things are the most beautiful. I've seen the most beautiful buildings in the world in the last few days. Because they're trying to convey something. They're trying to convey some deep appreciation. And the last one is contemplation. We've lost the contemplative mind. We've left it behind in favor of a calculative mind. So reintroducing the contemplation in the classroom in simple ways and complex ways, through writing, through speaking, through silence is something that's happening really beautifully right now. So let me end with this. So when we have a chance to really integrate these things, when we can really balance these ways of knowing, I think, we've got a chance to move from seeing the world as a collection of objects to experiencing it as a communion of subjects. To move from seeing the world as a collection of objects to experiencing it as a communion of subjects. And I think when we do, we've got a chance to making education a wisdom tradition itself. So, thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Professor Hart. I think with the given amount of time, we can open for a few questions. ตอนนี้น่าจะด้วยเวลานะคะอาจจะสามารถผู้เข้าร่วมประชุมสามารถถ้ามีใครต้องการที่จะมีคำถามไม่ทราบมีใครมีคำถามขอประมาณคงจะได้สักประมาณ2คำถามนะคะมีไหมคะยกมือได้เลยนะคะถ้ายังไม่ตื่นเดี๋ยวเราจะเอาซอม้าขึ้นมาปลุกอีกครั้งหนึ่งนะคะค่ะมีไหมคะโอเคค่ะด้านนี้นะคะขอไมค์ด้วย
Hello, good morning. My name is Ram. Earlier during the first part of your keynote, you said this quote of what's true and what's right, which really captured my attention. Because personally, I felt like there are certain things that are true but not necessarily right, and vice versa. For example, criminal punishment, for example, just because something is effective doesn't mean it's right. Or even in a classroom setting, just because you punish certain kids to change their actions and they really change, it's true, but it doesn't mean it's right. So can I ask, can you give a specific example of when we can have a perfect blend of what's true and what's right? Thank you.
No. You know, I think the quality of wisdom that really makes it such a beautiful mate, you know, for love, is that it's alive. It isn't accumulated knowledge, although some people talk about it that way, but it requires, you know, we either act wisely or don't. It's in the moment. So you really said it beautifully, you know. Sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that. There's not a universal, there's not one shoe that fits all. And that's exactly the point of, part of the point of wisdom, is that it requires our absolute full-hearted, full-seeing presence in the moment, now, with this person, in this situation, in this second, in order to decide, you know, what might be something that is a wise act or not. So it requires, again, this full embodied presence in the particularity of the situation. So you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe that was not a perfect wise answer, but you know, that's what comes, right? But it requires this embodiment, and you know, we can think for ourselves. I sometimes with my students, I'll say, okay, can you think of somebody who's wise? Just as this morning when, you know, we asked, can you think of someone or something that you love? And so, you know, it's wonderful to see who comes to mind for folks when you think of somebody who's wise. And certainly we can see historic figures, but often it's somebody who they know, and they say, well, I wouldn't think of them as wise, but my grandmother somehow really lives a life that seems wise. And I don't even know why I think she's wise, but there's a quality of being, right? There's a quality of presence. There's a quality of heart that this person has. Whether they make every decision wisely or not doesn't matter. There's something about tapping into that. So anyway, so I'll avoid the answer that way, if I may.